Good afternoon, everyone. I think there's just a few more joining us, so we'll just give it a moment or so before we begin. It has just gone 2 o'clock, so we'll kick off. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is a series, the first in the series of webinars that Enerva are going to be organising over the coming months. It's titled Preparing to Support Our Ageing Population, What Do We Need to Think About? Before we kick off and before I introduce our guests, just a little bit of housekeeping. Firstly, we are recording this, so if you do have any colleagues that can't make the call or you like to share it with colleagues, it's going to be available on the Enerva YouTube channel, so you'll be able to share that link. If there's anything that's discussed today that has a link or has some further information, we will be sharing that as well after the call. So, you know, no need to take notes or anything. It is going to be available for you to kind of pick up. And then finally, if you do have any questions, the way in which you're structuring it, you're going to be talking to Dave first, then to Rachel, and then there's going to be a Q&A at the end. So if you could drop your questions into the Q&A piece on here, and basically we'll then ask those questions in the time remaining that we have at the end of the session. So yeah, just before I then kick off and introduce the guests, I just want to set the call up with some statistics. So the UK, unsurprisingly, has an ageing population. There are nearly 12 million people aged 65 or above in the UK. And in 2017, the life expectancy age 65 was 21 years for women and 18.6 years for men. By 2030, 1 in 5 people, that's 22% of the population, will be aged 65 or over. And specifically, the 85 plus age group is the fastest growing, and it's set to double to 3.2 million by mid 2040 and treble by 2066. So, you know, I know there's been a lot of talk there about millennials, but with those statistics, who needs millennials? That clearly represents a seismic shift in our society, and it's going to present many challenges and opportunities. And to talk about the subject, I've got 2 knowledgeable experts in their field, and that's Rachel Young and Dave Stalker. And so if I could ask Rachel and Dave to introduce yourselves, tell us a little about yourself and your career and what brings you here today. So Rachel, if you'd like to just start.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, John, and thank you everybody for joining the call this afternoon. So my name's Rachel Young. I'm a physiotherapist by background. I've always worked amongst older adults and particularly people with stroke as well. I'm passionate about enabling exercise for that particular group of people and finding solutions that make it easy and enjoyable. So I currently work at the Advanced Wellbeing Research Centre in Sheffield with the team there, and I'll talk a little bit more about the centre in a few minutes. But good afternoon, great to see everybody here. Thanks,
Rachel, and I'm going to hand over to Dave.
Hi everybody, great to be here. And I have far less expertise in this field than Rachel, although perhaps I'm starting to move into the age group that is entirely relevant to this. I'm Dave Stalker. I'm the president of UkActive, was formerly chief executive of ukactive, and was the founding chairman of SIMSPA back in the day. I'm also chief executive of MyZone, which is a wearable tech, and I'm chairman of a zoo, which is entirely irrelevant to this conversation, but perhaps gets my mind thinking. And I've given my whole career over to health, fitness, movement, more people, more active, more often, and going back to those stats that John spoke about earlier on. I think I've certainly stood on enough lecterns and yelled about what are we doing for older populations. So I'm passionate about getting people moving.
Great, thank you, Dave. So Dave's going to talk first, and we're going to have a chat about the sector and its approach to healthy ageing. And then Rachel's going to talk about the 5 elements of healthy ageing and some research that she's recently completed. But David, over to you really, I guess. So first things from my perspective, not everybody is on this call is going to be from a leisure background. So UkActive, can you give us a brief description of what it does and why you've got involved?
Yeah, I will do, and I'll try and focus and bring it fairly quickly to active aging. Europe Active is the trade association for all the people who are trying to operate anything to get people moving and get people active throughout Europe. Remembering that we as Brits left the European Union and not Europe, so we are very much part of this, and there may well be people from the continent on this call. And really, I was brought in, having successfully grown UK Active, to do exactly that, and the aim really is to try and force the message across the Commission on the importance of exercise in answering all of its questions, and get that out to the many countries across Europe and back to the UK, so that we can not only look for the funding opportunities, but we can move, which is COVID has shown us, we move the way we think in the health and fitness attitude more from the fitness to health, and become a big health delivery partner. Yeah, it's that's really it. I'm president of it, so it's a non-executive role. So really, what I do is go to the Commission and try and deliver passionate pleas on behalf of the sector in terms of getting people moving.
Okay, and particularly Europe Active have got an active aging communities project, which I think actually is being, there's a big conference tomorrow, isn't there, in Brussels, where I think some of the results are going to come.
Absolutely.
What is it?
And I think as of tomorrow, for people who are on this call, they'll be able to go onto the Europe Active website. Please allow 2 days, as opposed to tell me tomorrow I couldn't get it. But I think there's been an active aging communities report, which was a 2-year Erasmus Plus funded project, and it was piloting a tailored 24-week program targeting older adults in fitness and recreational sport. And I suppose that the 4 things that were being looked at was creating communities for a healthier and more active older adults, and that was both healthier and mentally healthier, and just that feeling of being part of a community within a health and fitness environment where membership is relevant. Optimize the retention of people in a program, so seeing what program people would take part in, and would keep on going, because we know that this needs to become habit, lifestyle, movement, and the rest of it. Because we are a trade body looking after facilities and clubs, looking at the opportunity to look at new membership opportunities, particular for this area, as opposed to an afterthought. The statistics, once again, that John spoke about, and if you look in the statistics which are in the active aging communities report, they expect in Europe that it will not be, well, it'll be by 2030, 2040, that 65% of the population are going to be over 65. So it's crucial. So this was run to mobilize the fitness sector, address this physical activity and social isolation of older people in Europe, and realize how important this was. And there was 377 participants, and 91% of those have gone through the 24-week program and have positively. I can't give the statistics and facts, but the truth is that they've come out and said, wow, yes, we need more activity, and this is great, because programs need to be designed with these people in mind, and that was the ethos behind the whole conversation.
Okay, and you sort of referencing there that the results are coming out tomorrow, so sort of early next week you can certainly expect to see that information available on the Europe Active website, the results of the report. Yeah,
it'll be on the Europe Active website, it'll be on the EU's Commission website, and of course it's one thing to get it on the website, the next thing is to take it back to the Commission and see what are the funding opportunities that can come out of it.
Now you're not somebody who's sort of backwards in coming forwards with your thoughts on these sorts of things. So, you know, what are your thoughts on the opportunities, on the projected growth of the aging population? You know, represents to organisations in the UK or across Europe. You know, what share them, which I know you're not afraid to do.
No, well, I'm never afraid to share what I'd like to see happening, and then I'm never afraid to yell at people who aren't doing it. But what the report clearly says, and I'm sure that when Rachel talks about the statistics she has, that we as an industry have been world champions at focusing on fit people. And we frankly have ignored the rest of the population, and that is the vast majority, let alone the aging population. So my view is that if people are commercially looking at a sector and an opportunity, well, it's just about as big as opportunity. I just noticed that Rachel's disappeared from my screen, and I could see John's nerves that he might have lost her. I was going to have to speak to me indefinitely. Okay. Yeah, you terrified John there. He thought, oh, an hour of Dave Stalker, I can't be doing that. So I think if you take even the stats you talked about at the very beginning, John, well, and then you take any of our backgrounds as operators, if you can't possibly see that one of, if not the biggest opportunity you have isn't the aging population, well, frankly, what are you doing in the industry? And then if you take it a step further and you say, well, we've just come out of COVID, we have this opportunity to move from being fitness delivery partners to health delivery partners. Well, why wouldn't we focus in this area? And if we're going to let the pharmaceutical market run away with this, well, then step back. I mean, we're picking big battles because the pharma industry is a big battle, but we can make a bigger difference, not just to these aging people, but the lifestyle diseases that they suffer from. And there is no excuse. And when I speak at conferences and everyone talks about coming out of this pandemic, and I can't wait to get my membership base back to where it was previously, or I can't wait to get I'm so utterly disappointed, because my view is we should be looking at about 150% growth, because here it is. For the first time, health is sitting at our door with the opportunity to deliver it, and aging is a crucial element of that. So let's grab it. And it's not just the fitness and movement, it's also the mental health and all the rest of it that comes through. Yeah.
So why Dave? So you know, you're echoing an enormous amount of things that people have talked to me. You know, those kind of conversations have been ongoing for ages. So, you know, why hasn't it happened? What are the challenges specifically that the sort of sector is? Why hasn't it embraced that? Why have we been world champions at making fit people fitter? You know.
Yeah, I think we've been world champions of it because. Well, you know, we've got some fantastic instructors and people who work in the industry, but now on the back of SIMSPA, there is a career path. There is ways people can go. There are expertise that people can go. I mean, it would be fair to say, and I don't know whether it comes out of the report now, that the aging population might like to work out with some older people. I don't know whether that's a fact, but we do know that most of our instructors and most of our deliverers are young, and perhaps don't fully understand the challenges. I mean, that's just a training need. That's about having the right training and development and looking for compassionate people. We've employed fit people and not necessarily compassionate people. Let's employ into our sector people who really care. We can teach them how to be instructors. We can teach them the needs and the rest of it. So I think we've missed out on that opportunity over time. I think we've also missed out because it's an area where funding will grow, because if we don't want the national health to go bankrupt at the point of entry, you know, free health, we've got to get people healthier. Now, what we do as an industry, we immediately go to let's deal with the younger generation's obesity problems, and they're all crucial. But actually, there's enormous cost at the top end of this. So this kind of report and these kind of things suddenly make funding opportunities. Now, if you're operating in trusts or local authorities, you're more attuned to that. You're more attuned to understanding it. But of course, you're now dealing with the national health and looking through funding through various government bodies. And we've always been Department of Culture, Media and Sport, absolutely no use to anybody when we should be talking Department of Health, because that's where it all comes from. So hopefully that then trickles through, but it's hard work, and it's up to passionate people right in local communities to nationally to really knock those doors. And without these kind of reports or peer-reviewed journals or white papers, frankly, it's very tricky. So I often think it's lack of passion, and because it's hard work, and perhaps people aren't as creative in their mind about the opportunity that might well come out of it.
And do you foresee, so it's really interesting there, your conversations there that led towards government and funding and things. Do you foresee any opportunity for private sector organisations to sort of create almost bespoke private sector solutions around, the healthy ageing thing? Because, clearly you could see perhaps some of the more medically linked organisations understanding there that perhaps older people have got availability of money and that's something that they could capitalise on.
Yeah, I think private or public, but private organisations tend to have the ability, or at least the deeper pockets, in order to do the work, to create the programmes and all the thing in the background. They're less pushed against pressures on cash, although we all are currently. But whether you're private or public, this is a health issue. So whether you're privately looking, there is no reason why you shouldn't be able to take that. If you take most private operator or private group across the UK, what is our aim? If we say we're going to try and move from fitness to health, what else are we going to try? In order to do that, you need to own your communities. Who are one of the biggest part of your communities? The aging population. What does your local authority want to get out of it? A more moving, more agile aging population, because it costs them less money and because it is better in all kinds of fields. And there is no reason why, as a private operator, you or private person, you can't go in there and say, hey, I want to be on this playing field because I can make a difference and I can move quickly. Yeah.
And without playing favourites, are you seeing any organisations, and they don't have to be necessarily fitness organisations, it can be more broadly across society, are there any organisations in Europe or the UK that are really nailing this, that are really kind of understanding the need to support older exercise and are doing something about it?
Yeah, I think I'm not going to name people in particular, but there are that. I feel positive because some of the big trusts and some of the bigger have acknowledged it, and they've acknowledged it in many ways as a byproduct. So they've seen the opportunity of health, so they've got interested in, let's say, in serious health issues, post cancer and the rest, and out of it suddenly realized that this is a health industry. So Manchester is doing more and more stuff in this area. You've suddenly got more bodies in Westminster. If you take if I took this hat off and put on a UK hat and a ukactive hat and a MyZone hat, we're just about to do MyZone Parliamentary Challenge, where all of the MPs are going to be taking part of that. And in speaking to them, it is incredible how many of those MPs have the ageing population. So without saying these are people who are doing it well, they wouldn't be saying it if they weren't under voting pressure, whether that's from people or organisations. So I feel more confident about this as a market currently than other markets that we should be interested in, like whether it be mental health or things like that, where we should be involved.
Thanks, Dave. I mean, it's great to see you've not lost any of your passion for the sector and for the subject. And just before we move on, is there anything else that you would want to cover on the call, or any final thoughts, I guess?
Yeah, and I realise my hands go all over the place, and John, who's known me for years, knows that this hand is known as Emu because he goes all from what I just think that as a sector that we have to embrace this challenge. With every challenge, you have to embrace it positively. We have to accept as a sector that nothing is easy and it's hard work, and we're making a difference to people who really care. And by dealing with these people who really care, they will help the next generation down and the next generation under that and so forth. So it's a societal. It's crucial that we are able to sit back, and I got to say, I got involved in that and tried to make a difference. It's absolutely important. We must do it. The passion is there for me. The passion is there from so many people, and there are lots of people. Rachel will talk about what she's up to, but these reports, getting to Erasmus 2 and getting a plan and get something going out there, you know, anyone who's spent as much time as Brussels as I have will tell you that that's a lot of knocking on frustrated doors of people who are really don't seem to be doing anything. Well, if you're going to knock on those doors and they're going to start to open, well, when I look over my shoulder, please, for God's sake, let there be a lot of people who want to take advantage of it. So all I'm asking is, you know, I got loads of passion. Loads of people on this call have loads of expertise, and together we can make an army to make a really real difference.
Dave, that's wonderful. Thank you. So for everybody on the call, if you do have any questions for Dave or for Rachel, there is a Q&A box effectively that you can drop them into, and Dave's going to be staying with us till the end and then covering any of your questions, or certainly you know, a few of your questions. So thanks, Dave. I'm going to hand over to Rachel, and I think Laura is going to share now her screen with some of Rachel's slides, I'm hoping. Okay, over to you, Rachel.
Thank you, David. That was really interesting and inspiring. So I think hopefully what I'll look at will drill down into some of the nuts and bolts surrounding that vision that you shared so passionately there. So this is a summary of a project that we did at the Advanced Wellbeing Research Centre at the end of last year, which really was to investigate the real-time physical demand of power-assisted exercise, and to address some of the unanswered questions surrounding how hard it is to engage in assisted exercise in terms of what the physical demand will be. So next slide, please, Laura. Thank you. So we identified that there were 5 key components to active and healthy ageing, and they are listed here on this slide. So starting at the top there, we've got aerobic fitness. So aerobic fitness is really how well our heart, lungs and circulation work to get oxygen out to exercising muscles. So this is really important, because if the aerobic system isn't working efficiently, then we will become breathless really easily. So walking upstairs, even getting out of a chair and walking across a room can make people feel breathless. It makes movement unenjoyable and can actually make people feel really anxious. So that's one of the big reasons why it's really important to help older adults to maintain or improve their aerobic fitness by optimizing the function in the heart, the lungs and the vascular system. But it's also really important in terms of preventing cardiovascular disease as well. So lack of aerobic fitness is one of the big risk factors when we're looking at the risk of having a stroke, having a heart attack, developing angina, or developing a condition such as diabetes as well. So when we exercise, it is good to become breathless. It is good to challenge the heart and lungs. So finding ways of exercising that's sustainable but does challenge the aerobic system is really important for all of those reasons. Moving down to muscular strength. So it's our muscles which enable us to move, and as part of the aging process, they get smaller. So they get smaller in terms of the number of fibres that we have, and they get smaller in terms of the diameter of those fibres as well. And even amongst those people who remain very active into their older years, they will have some muscle loss. but it is much, much less than for those people who've become sedentary in their middle or older years. So maintaining good muscular strength, challenging the muscular system, encouraging the muscles to work against resistance is really important. It'll help people to remain functionally active. It'll help activities such as getting out of a chair, walking up and down stairs, again, similar to those activities associated with aerobic fitness, but also lifting and carrying. Those jobs which are part of everyday life are really important to be supported by good muscular strength. And there's a lot of evidence which suggests those people that maintain good muscular performance are much less likely to become frail in their older years. Flexibility is important because it's about our ability to reach and move between surfaces. So that's things such as reaching up for cupboards, reaching down to the floor to pick something up, but it also prevents pain and injury as well. So again, similar to the loss of muscular strength, we do get stiffer as we get older. Our soft tissues do lose their elasticity. But again, that is something that's very much reduced if people remain active and particularly engage in stretching activities and moving the joints through their natural range of motion. Finally, balance, a very complex part of our physical performance. So balance really synchronizes the information from our eyes, from our vestibular system, from the nerve receptors in our joints and muscles to help us keep upright against gravity and prevent us from falling over when we're moving around. But we know that balance does decline with older age and is one of the big risk factors for falling. So associated with falls risk, if people become fearful of falling, then they will often avoid going out or going into situations where they think their balance might be a challenge. So people lose their physical confidence, but tied in with that, they will often have a decline in their social activity as well. So all of these physical factors very much feed into that overall psychosocial well-being as well. So feeling confident about your physical ability, feeling able to go out and about is very important in terms of psychosocial well-being and your confidence in terms of being able to go into different venues or mix with other individuals. So these were the 5 elements of active ageing that we identified and wanted to investigate through our study. Thank you, Laura. Next slide, please. So here is a picture of the Advanced Wellbeing Research Centre. It's based in North Sheffield. It's an interdisciplinary centre. We work closely with engineers, designers, exercise scientists and rehab professionals. And we're very much dedicated to developing and testing innovations which help people to move. Thank you, Laura. Next slide, please. So why did we conduct this study? So on the one hand, when I started working with Untitled and saw the potential of assisted exercise as a solution for older adults or people living with physical changes, some of my colleagues suggested that it was either lazy exercise, it didn't have any aerobic demand associated with it, or really it was just a passive stretch. So a lot of suggestion out there that the power assisted exercise didn't put enough of a demand on the physiological systems to address those 5 elements that we've identified earlier. However, when we speak to the end users of the equipment, those older adults or people with health changes who do use the equipment, they were saying things like my balance has improved, I feel stronger, I can see my muscles have improved in terms of their bulk, I feel fitter, I don't get breathless anymore, and my body feels looser, I don't feel so stiff, and often people reported that their pain symptoms had improved. So there was a mismatch in terms of what the end users were reporting and some of the assumptions that we were hearing about power assisted exercise. Thank you, Laura. Next slide. So what we set out to do was to look at the immediate responses, what actually happens to people on a physiological level when they're exercising on these machines. So it was to look at the real-time physiological responses, and this would help us to inform how we prescribe the use of the equipment. Equally, we could have done a study where we tested people at baseline at week 1, watched them through, for example, a 12-week programme of power-assisted exercise, and then tested again at the end to see if they had got fitter and stronger. However, that would have left some unanswered questions. You can never, with a longer study, there's always going to be some compounding variables, i.e. we can't really control what else happens to people during that 12 weeks. For example, they might have a cold, which affects their engagement or their fitness, or they might also decide to take up a different form of exercise that we're not aware of. Also, it wouldn't give us particularly valuable information about the different machines that Enerva manufacture and what their respective merits might be. Thank you, Laura. So next slide, please. So we set about to measure the aerobic demand of power-assisted exercise using cardiopulmonary exercise test technology. So you'll see a picture here of one of our participants, obviously taken with permission, and you'll see that he's wearing a blue mask, which is rigged up to a computer and software system behind. So this equipment measures how much oxygen people take and use during exercise, so we can see what the aerobic demand, how hard is the heart and the lungs working during this exercise activity. We looked at muscular strength, so you'll see the little black matchboxes on the shin and on the arms. They are detecting muscle activity to see what the muscular demand or muscular responses are. You'll see lots of little silver balls attached to the participant. That was rigged up to a motion analysis system, so we could see from a flexibility point of view how far people were moving. And we also tested balance performance before and after exercising during each session. And we recruited 9 participants who were aged between 56 and 78 to our study. Next slide, please. So here's just some pictures of our laboratory testing. So the pictures on the the left-hand side of the slide show how we tested the muscles to get a feel for what was normal for that muscle, for that participant, so we could work out what percentage of muscle activity was occurring during exercise. And then the picture on the right shows some of the technology as that exercise was visualized on the screen. So the bottom of that picture shows the trace of muscle activity, so we can see very clear bursts of when the muscle was switched on during, for example, the push part of an exercise, and then the muscle switching off, for example, when the machine was returning back to neutral, indicating that the muscles definitely respond whilst engaging in power assisted exercise. Next slide, please. So we also asked people to sort of taper their effort during each 5-minute test. So each participant spent 5 minutes on each machine with the different data collection methods running throughout. And for the first minute, we treat that as a warm-up. So we just said, let the machine move you, work at a very low rate of perceived exertion. So it will feel like very light activity that you could potentially continue all day. But as the minutes went by, so you can see during the 3rd and 4th minutes that actually we were asking for a much harder level of activity. So we were suggesting that people felt like they would be working harder, feeling warm, feeling breathless, not to a maximum effort, because we would rarely encourage that in this type of setting, but certainly to see what a moderate to hard effort felt like. And then the final minute was a cool down there. Next slide, please. So one of the outcomes that we explored was the metabolic equivalence, or METs, of the demand of the activity. And we've just got, I'm sure a lot of people who've got a fitness instruction background on the course today will be very familiar with this table, but it's very much around how hard or what the demand of a particular activity is, and how that might reflect sort of the types of activities that we might take part in during everyday activities. So, for example, something that's a METS value of 3, that's similar to going for a gentle walk or sweeping the floors. If we're exercising at a METS of 4, then that's brisk walking. And by the time we're going up to 9 METS, that's equivalent to jogging at 6 miles per hour. And these are calculated according to people who don't live with any physical changes. So for older adults, actually it might be slightly different, but this was the basis for our data analysis on aerobic effort. Next slide, please. So the results that came back, so I'm just going to go through a couple of the machines. We actually tested 11 machines in total over the course of our study. I won't go through all of them, it would get repetitive, but I'm just going to go through a couple of the machines where we pulled data. So whilst people were on the cross cycle, they on average were working at a mean METs of 4.1, so that's the equivalent to going for a brisk walk, with the average of 5.6 as the peak METs when they were putting in that very hard effort during the 3rd and 4th minute. And on average, people had a mean heart rate of 105 beats per minute, which is at least 20 to 30 beats above their resting rate, with some people peaking at a heart rate of 120 whilst exercising on this machine. So we could see that there was a clear aerobic demand, on average similar to going for a brisk walk, with during those harder efforts, people doing activity which might be the equivalent of playing tennis, dancing, or doing speed walking, or even starting to go towards a very slow jog. We can see that the muscles were active, so the biceps, those elbows which bend the elbow, were working at 27% of their maximum available contraction. The triceps were working at 53%. The rectus femoris is the quads muscle down the front of the thigh, which helps to straighten the knee. That was firing up at 54% of the maximum available amount. And the biceps femoris, which is one of the hamstrings at the back, was working at 20%. So we could see very clear responses from the aerobic system and the muscular system whilst people were exercising on the cross cycle machine. Next slide, please. Thank you. And this just shows the trace of how, as somebody's effort increased on the cross cycle, the demand in terms of the METs detected and calculated, how that increased as well during that 3rd and 4th minute. So we can see with this particular individual who put in a really hard effort during those 3rd and 4th minutes, they were actually exercising at 8 METs, which is the equivalent to jogging at around 5 miles per hour. So definitely not a passive form of exercise, I think we would conclude from that. Next slide, please. The seated climber, we saw some similar data coming out from this, so I will go through it a little bit more quickly, but we can see that people were exercising on average at just over 3 METs, which is comparable to a walk, and then peaking at 4.9 METs, indicating a very vigorous uphill walk in terms of the equivalent level of activity. The heart rate was climbing to reflect that as well. And the key muscle groups, the triceps, the quadricep muscles down the front of the thigh, the biceps, all working to generate movement as well. Next slide, please. And we can see here the trace that was detected from an individual who used the seated climber. So we can see that as the intended effort increases, the rate of perceived exertion increases, then the data that we collected reflected that as well. So the heart starts to work harder and people are gaining that benefit of aerobic exercise. Next slide, please. So a different machine, the side flexor, this was one of the recumbent machines that we looked at. And as we might anticipate, the aerobic demand of this was lower. So people were working at a mean METs of 1.43, which is similar to, for example, sitting at a desk, peaking up towards 2.8, which might be like going for a very gentle stroll during their harder efforts on this machine. But we can see it was more of a restorative form of exercise, which might be suitable, for example, if people are looking for a rest day, if they're recovering from illness, or if they're managing symptoms such as fatigue, or they're looking for a cool down option as part of their workout. But we can also see that the motion analysis data showed us that the trunk moved through a large range of lateral flexion, so that would give a really good stretch through the rib cage, which is often an area that becomes very stiff in older age, and particularly as a physio, I know is a very hard area to stretch or mobilise as well. So definitely some clear flexibility benefits associated with this particular piece of equipment. Next slide, please. And as we can see here, for this particular participant, their heart rate actually dropped whilst they were using this piece of equipment. So we can see that potentially for people who want to be able to recover, maybe want to be able to manage fatigue, that there could be some very benefits associated with this recumbent form of exercise. Next slide, please. So we looked at balance, and we did this by testing different stance conditions before and after exercise. With their feet together and then their feet in tandem stance, eyes open, eyes closed. We thought two things might happen here. People might actually be more steady post-exercise because they've moved, because they've had that sensory feedback, or actually they might have a sea leg effect. So actually people might feel more unsteady after assisted exercise. We found really the former appeared to be true, that there was less sway, particularly in the forwards backwards direction, which is often a key predictor of falls risk. So if someone tends to sway a lot backwards and forwards, then they're more likely to experience a fall. So that was reduced according to the motion analysis data after exercise, and also we recorded fewer falls or stumbles on the balance testing post-exercise as well. Thank you. Next slide, please. So this is just a very quick summary of the machines. It's too much detail to talk through on this occasion, but we just looked at all of these machines were included in this particular study, and it helped us to identify the respective merits of each machine in terms of the aerobic demand, which muscles were active, which parts of the body were stretched, and what the impact on balance was as well. Thank you. So to summarise, during a circuit of power-assisted exercise with a modulated effort from the user, on average people will sustain an effort of 3 METs, which is the equivalent of going for a walk, but they will certainly have peaks of much higher than that during their harder efforts on some of the more demanding machines. The movement of the limbs and trunk is assisted in multiple directions, so abduction, flexion, extension, rotation, and there was frequent bursts of rhythmic muscular activity associated with most of the machines, which varied between 30 to 70% of the maximum capacity of those particular muscle groups, and the amount of backwards and forwards sway that was detected decreased, indicating that people were less likely to fall post-exercise as well. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Rachel. That was really interesting, and I think you know, one question from me, and harking back actually to Dave's kind of sort of previous point about, you know, the sector being really good at focusing on fit people. I think it's fair to say, to put some of that stuff into context, because if you're a fit person, you know, getting to that level of METs that you were describing, or you know, achieving some of those things, you'd kind of think, well, that's nothing, isn't it? But you know, the way in which I'd look at it is you're not seeing lots of sort of 80-year-olds out jogging every day, or going to the gym, or doing those kind of things. So I think, you know, is there a piece there around putting some of those results into context of the user group that perhaps they're targeting?
Definitely. I think you're right. I think it's difficult to either initiate or sustain that intensity of activity if you are an older adult. The things that start to obstruct it are things like joint stiffness, pain, inefficiency in the heart and the lungs, or weakness in the muscles. So by getting a helping hand, I think, with assisted exercise, it means that people can feel safe, but at the same time start to push their physiology as well. And what we looked at with the study was a model where people could have a kind of a passive or resting mode, very light mode at the start and end of the 5 minutes, but push to a harder intensity during the middle as well. So, you know, I think people were achieving a higher intensity of exercise than they might have done had they been using non-assistive equipment.
Thanks, Rachel. That was really helpful. So we're now going to move into the sort of Q&A session. If you do have any questions, drop them in. I've got a few here that have come in. So the first one relates to something that David kind of touched on maybe earlier on. Do either of you see any potential opportunities around the employment of older people, specifically in the health and leisure sector workforce? What kind of things do you think could be of benefit there? Trying to draw more older people into that sphere.
I think both of us have views, but I'm going to let Rachel go first. Go for it, Rachel.
Well, thank you, David. Well, just briefly, there's certainly examples of where that's worked very well in pulmonary rehab programs, for example, where patients will join a program for 12 weeks, but then be invited to help with the delivery of that program ongoing. So I think the self-esteem, the confidence, the ongoing engagement in that community and that type of activity is fantastic for those individuals. So, and it also makes it a lot more accessible for those people who are incoming, because if it's Jack from round the corner who's leading a session, it might feel a lot more inviting than if it's someone who's unknown to you and possibly appears to be from a different generation or from a different way of life. David, carry on.
Yeah, no, I agree totally with you. I think we can think of a number of stories over the course of time when someone said, oh, I had a heart problem. I did a course. I was an older person, and then I got into fitness, and now I'm a fitness instructor. And every so often, you're in a gym and you see someone from the older population. You work, and they work there, and it's always been a story that's led them there to becoming that. And 9 times out of 10, the most popular person in the facility to everybody, let alone to the people who are their peers, because they genuinely care and they've had the experience. But we do need to move past you've got to have some awful health experience in order to come to terms with fitness in order to end up working with it. So I think that training providers need to look at that, and we need to dress it up in the, it's a bit like I was at a talk this morning, and it was on it wasn't on cryptocurrency, but it was on a sandbox, whatever that is. My variation of a sandbox had a castle in it, but I thought I'm really interested and I'm doing my best to understand it, but it's not my world. And I think because health and fitness is relatively a new world, we put people off because they think, oh, I'm not too sure. Yet these older people were fit youngsters. They might not have been in gyms, but they were out walking and they were doing whatever they have. So we just need to we need to set up training courses that encourage the aging population, because frankly they're the most dedicated instructors that you get, because they really want to make a difference. So between training providers, I would passionately cry out, make it available, make it so they understand it. And to someone like SIMSPA, I would say this has got to be in your pathways and has got to be very clear, but we need to understand that we're marketing to the right population, otherwise we won't attract them in.
No, I completely agree, and I think it's particularly pertinent at the moment, isn't it, given the great resignation that's occurred and sort of the seemingly stretched workforce that we have across the UK and Europe. I think it's probably something we are going to try and follow up on a future webinar on, and see if we can attract some of those training providers to give their thoughts on it. So, do you think there are any other things outside of the sector that society does need to get right to support older people to live active lives?
I think certainly. You go, David. Go.
No,
ahead.
You go, Rachel. You go, because go on.
I think signposting, and particularly from healthcare providers, I think there's always room for progress there. It does happen very well in some pathways. There's some excellent examples that we're aware of as a team. But also we know that there's often, for example, if someone's had a stroke or had a hospital admission following a fall, you'll receive a package of care and then go home with very limited signposting as to where to go next. So I think building that connectivity between third sector and leisure providers and our health service professionals, there's some examples in that space, but also great potential for more progress.
And that would reflect exactly what I think, that link with health providers, that link with GPs, that understanding at whether it's a general practitioner level or at your consultant level or whatever. I mean, Rachel's a physiotherapist who fully understands the importance of exercise. Doctors fully understand it, but perhaps don't embrace the opportunity. And what they do is, well, you could do with doing a bit of exercise. Well, that's not signposting anyone anywhere. That's not pushing them to a solution. You go most parks now, you see an opportunity for people to do exercise with no real clue on how they're going to go about doing it, or any encouragement to do that. You know, I mean, you guys sell fantastic kit which is available in places, but we all know that if people take part in exercise, eventually they march into the facilities. Often it's getting the confidence together. So what is wrong with GP surgeries organising activity groups in parks, organising walks, getting together with a whole load of people to take the dog out and things like that? It has to be a little bit more than that. So, you know, that link between health providers and healthcare and the signposting of it, as opposed to go out there and now use your creativity. Not, you know, oh, get off the bus a stop earlier, maybe put on the bus stops. If you get off here, this is the difference. You know, speak to people, let them know, give them something, reward them for putting an effort into it.
So I've got a final question, and then we'll let you go. But actually around that messaging and around the health thing, you know, do you think that the UK physical activity guidelines that recommend adults, you know, participate in 150 minutes a week, you know, which is about, you know, 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, do you think it encourages, or do you think it puts off older exercisers?
I think something's better than nothing, isn't it? And sometimes if something seems unobtainable, people might disengage altogether. So it's helpful, I think, for prescribers to have sight of those guidelines. I'm not sure it's a good fit with a lot of the end users we might be trying to reach. And also within those guidelines, they're often quite limited in terms of solutions. It's a prescription, but not a solution.
And that for me is the whole thing. You can make the statement, and that's fine with the statement, but what do people have to do to get to that statement? Because actually turning that into, you know, actually doing something, a walk out with the dogs, doing some exercise, understanding the importance of some resistance-based exercise, particularly with the old aging population. You know, I think and it's very difficult for government because they have to put down a statement. And that's where it becomes very important for health providers and health clubs to break that statement down into, into prescription, into things which people understand, which they can imagine doing, because it's not so difficult once they give it a go, but when you just read it, it almost sounds impossible, but we know it's not. Yeah.
And I think for me, somebody once said, I'm not sure who it was, that the best exercise is the one that you do, of course. So, you know, doing nothing is of no use to anybody, but at least doing something has some kind of benefit. Guys, I know, Dave, you need to be away, so thank you very much for giving up your time this afternoon. Thank you for the attendees, and hope you found it beneficial. Just to remind you, the recording is going to be available on the Enerva YouTube channel, and there is going to be another one of these taking place in December. So thank you very much for your time. And